Insulting me is a badge of honor for me, but I think we all know, as both as an educator for a couple decades and as a parent, using that term is just so damaging. It's hurtful. We have fought 3 decades to get this out of our schools. Kids know better than to use it. But look, this is what Donald Trump has done.
Is happening. I just don't think that you need to go the extra mile and make a claim as extreme as they're funding a terrorist group in Somalia until you have the goods, until you can actually prove that's happening. And let's also keep in mind that the US government does a good enough job stealing our money to fund foreign terror groups as it is. So maybe there should be some ire directed toward.
This isn't just another political headline. It's a total breakdown of a narrative under extreme pressure. Ana Kasparian just hit the accelerator, leaving Tim Walz scrambling to maintain traction amidst a massive fraud scandal involving millions. The receipts are out, the sarcasm is sharp, and those calculated side eyes from Kasparian tell a story that official press releases simply can't cover. Watch as the reliable narrative flips in real time, excuses crumble, and the political spin cycle completely malfunctions before your eyes. Is this just a well-timed critique? Or are we witnessing the moment a carefully crafted reputation finally unravels? Get comfortable, keep your eyes on the screen, and see what happens when the silence finally breaks and the truth gets impossible to ignore.
Minnesota in particular.
At first it was Minnesota, but then it was later reported.
It's all 50 states?
All 50 states, they have to provide evidence that,
Oh, I didn't realize that he brought it in.
Yeah, so basically law-abiding,
okay, maybe
child
that's a little bit overboard. I thought it was
100%.
just that state.
Yeah, that is overboard. I want to be clear about something. Due to the massive amount of COVID aid that flowed into states across the country, fraud has been a problem, not just in Minnesota, but all across the country. In fact,
if you want to stay ahead of the curve on stories the mainstream media won't touch, please subscribe to the channel. It makes a huge difference. The second Ana Kasparian locks her sights on Tim Walz, the atmosphere shifts instantly from standard political commentary to a methodical, high-stakes demolition. She isn't just talking. She is delivering a masterclass in irony, backed by a mountain of context that makes every official explanation look like a flimsy house of cards.
Off of something that broke earlier this year in November. There was a huge story that was published in the New York Times about fraud cases in the Minneapolis area. And most of these, nonprofits or these little businesses that were popping up and basically benefiting from COVID era public money were Somali owned. Now, 2 things are happening at the same time. On one hand, these fraud cases appear to be very serious and very real.
This isn't a friendly back and forth or a minor policy disagreement that can be smoothed over with a handshake and a smile. This is a one-way ideological showdown where Tim Walz is essentially trapped in the passenger seat of his own talking points. Ana Kasparian is the one behind the wheel, calmly driving the entire conversation straight off the cliff of political credibility.
Another day. Okay, so a YouTuber named Nick Shirley uncovered arguably even he claims $100 million of fraud in Minnesota under Governor Tim Walz's.
Tim Walz enters this arena leaning heavily into his familiar persona, the dependable, common-sense Midwestern leader we've all seen. He's the kind of politician who looks like he should be at a state fair discussing soil quality or cheering on a local parade rather than answering for missing millions.
Bad faith actors who might be using this for terrible political purposes. The fact remains that it appears that close to $9 billion, according to prosecutors, have been stolen from taxpayers in the Minneapolis area as a result of these fraudulent businesses. And I want to give you more details about it in just a second. But before I do, Cenk, your 2 cents.
Unfortunately for Walz, that nice guy image doesn't act as a shield when the hard questions start stacking up like overdue notices. Ana Kasparian wastes no time stripping away the decorative surface to reveal the lack of substance underneath. Good vibes are no substitute for actual competence once the gears of government oversight start to grind and fail. The Somali fraud scandal isn't some minor footnote here. Ana ensures it is the elephant in the room that Walz keeps trying to pretend is a piece of furniture. His claims that everything is under control are starting to sound like desperate wishful thinking, especially when control seems to mean praying that nobody asks a single follow-up question. Kasparian doesn't need to shout to make her point. She lets the cold facts do the damage, while her sarcasm sweeps up the remains of his defense.
Under the assumption, and this was, I guess, a terrible assumption to have because it's not true, that there would be a recalibration of some of these policies in order to actually serve the best interests of the American people. But what I've noticed, certainly on a local level, is that there's absolutely no self-reflection, no recalibration of said policies. And on a national level, there seems to be more interest in serving the egos and, the narcissism of.
Every time he tries to hide behind dense bureaucratic jargon, it gets treated like a tired magic trick that everyone has already figured out. Walz's reliance on process and administrative complexity has become a recurring joke throughout this analysis. It's not that the process is irrelevant. It's that using it as a shield makes it look like he's hiding behind a giant filing cabinet to avoid eye contact. Kasparian cuts through the noise with surgical precision, reminding the audience that being confused by a system isn't the same thing as being innocent of its failures. The roast gets even more intense when she highlights the massive gap between his polished moral clarity, brand, and the murky reality of this investigation. Suddenly, that famous Walz authority is nowhere to be found when the spotlight hits this specific, uncomfortable corner of his administration. She treats this as a classic case of branding gone wrong, where the label promises total transparency, but the product inside is completely opaque. The irony builds as the explanations get more abstract, eventually sounding like a student who forgot to do their part of a group project. Kasparian points out that every clarification from his office only spawns 5 new questions, turning his defense into a disaster. Walz isn't portrayed as a mustache-twirling villain, but as something perhaps more damaging, a leader who is genuinely shocked that accountability eventually comes knocking.
Emphasize childcare centers where Shirley shows up during weekday business hours to find that there are actually no children present. There are also some pretty extreme claims that we need more evidence for, which I'll get into in just a second. So a claim was just kind of casually made about how this money is then being siphoned off and sent over to Al-Shabaab, a terrorist group that operates out of Somalia. Now, there hasn't been any evidence.
As the critique continues, Kasparian widens the lens to ensure one crucial point is understood by everyone watching. This isn't an attack on a specific community, despite how much some political spin doctors want to shift the focus there. The Somali community isn't the target. They are the victims of a massive administrative failure and a lack of top-down responsibility. Ana makes it clear that using marginalized groups as a political human shield is both ineffective and deeply insulting when the real issue is a total lack of oversight. Walz's broader record is brought in not as a tangent, but as a contrast that makes the current mess feel even more ridiculous. For a governor praised for being a steady hand, he seems remarkably shaky when basic questions are asked. Kasparian hammers home the idea that leadership isn't about how you act when things are easy, but how you handle the fire when things go wrong. She also skewers the media protection detail surrounding him, where the silence feels more like a PR strategy than actual reporting. Ignoring a scandal doesn't make it go away, and Ana is quick to point out that selective outrage is a terrible look for anyone claiming to be a journalist.
The Department of Health and Human Services has decided to effectively punish all child care centers in the state of Minnesota by halting federal child care payments toward the state. And of course, this is over allegations that some of these child care centers are engaging in fraud. Now, Deputy HHS Secretary Jim O'Neill said in a post on X that funds will be released only when states prove they are being spent legitimately.
Meanwhile, Walz's official statements, filtered through 10 layers of legal caution, come across as a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing with a lot of words. Kasparian treats this verbal gymnastics with visible disdain, showing that true leadership requires more than just dodging verbs that imply responsibility. All the talk of ongoing reviews and investigative processes starts to sound like a lullaby designed to put the public to sleep. Ana then pivots to the concept of trust, treating it like a currency that Walz is rapidly spending. His trust deficit isn't a single event. It's a slow, steady leak of credibility caused by choosing evasiveness over clarity at every turn. Her sarcasm is at its peak here, exposing the flaw in thinking that public trust is an infinite resource you can just renew without fixing the underlying issues. Even his past statements on ethics are brought back to haunt him, acting as a silent condemnation of his current conduct. Kasparian makes the contrast sting by letting Walz's own cultivated values do the talking, showing how inconvenient those standards have suddenly become.
Over and over again, you'll see them go visit various childcare facilities and you'll see that there's no one there, there are no children. And sometimes they'll find workers there and they'll ask some questions. The workers are very evasive. And I should note that while, yes, it is true that prosecutors have already been investigating similar fraud cases in the area and there have already been arrests, what's important to know about the businesses that were visited by Shirley and David here, we're still
The fraud scandal remains the center of gravity in this roast, resurfacing again and again because unresolved issues don't just evaporate. Kasparian is firm. Questions don't have an expiration date, no matter how hard you try to ignore them. Walz's hope that time will heal what transparency didn't is a failing strategy. She reframes the idea that criticism equals hostility, explaining that skepticism is actually a basic requirement of a healthy democracy. His defensive posture looks less like leadership and more like a misunderstanding of the job description. The humor stays razor-sharp because it's rooted in the quiet, devastating truth that you can't outrun reality forever with a good PR team. Toward the end, the tone shifts to a subtle warning. Political careers aren't usually ended by a bang, but by the slow erosion of trust. Walz isn't finished, but he is shown wobbling under the weight of his own non-answers, diminished by a refusal to face the music head-on.
Indicating that certain requirements would need to be met before federal grants are approved for childcare programs in all states, not just Minnesota. With that in mind, let's take a look at what he had to say.
I have activated our Defend the Spend system for all ACF childcare payments across America. Starting today, we require a justification, receipt, or photo evidence before we make a payment. Second, I've just signed and sent a demand letter to Governor Walz. I required a full 360 review.
You're left with the realization that this wasn't just a video. It was a total takedown of the respectability shield that politicians often hide behind. Kasparian refuses to let the title or the office act as a get-out-of-jail-free card for accountability. She treats his high position as an amplifier. The bigger the job, the louder the silence. Every attempt to pivot to his legacy is pulled back to the actual consequences of the fraud. It's like watching a man try to rearrange the deck chairs while the ship is taking on water, convinced that if the furniture looks straight, nobody will notice the ocean. Kasparian shows that official reassurances have become mere background noise, a playlist designed to stall until the news cycle moves on. But she warns that political decline is a quiet process, a slow sinking into skepticism that will follow him to every future press conference and policy announcement.
Of the Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families said none of the 10 childcare centers that YouTuber Nick Shirley recently visited for his viral video had their payments paused, although a couple were previously closed down by the state, and state workers are doing visits to the rest today. So these facilities, even though there was prior knowledge by the state that there was fraud going on, these facilities were still receiving these government grants.
The contrast becomes even sharper when Kasparian compares Walz to the average person. If a regular citizen mishandled funds on this scale, the consequences would be swift and severe. In politics, however, these disasters are often framed as teachable moments, rather than a breach of the public trust. Her sarcasm highlights this double standard, showing that accountability seems to get softer the closer you get to the seat of power. Walz's calm authority now feels like insulation, a way to keep a safe distance between himself and the consequences of his administration's actions. The message is undeniable. Being steady means nothing if there is no substance behind it. Just surviving a controversy isn't the same as actually resolving it, and Walz now carries a permanent asterisk on his record.
Clear what he means by the photo evidence. Like what is that going to prove? He says upon receipt of payment. What do you want a photo of? Do you want photos of children at the daycare centers? I don't know. There was a lack of clarity there. I personally don't have any problem whatsoever with increased oversight of how public money is being spent, because it is true that fraud is a problem, not just in Minnesota, but fraud has been a huge problem in many states, as I've mentioned, California being one of them, because there was this massive infusion of COVID era money from the federal government to the states in order to keep people whole as, shutdowns were taking place and people were losing their jobs. That's always going to, unfortunately,
Even what he doesn't say becomes a massive part of the critique. Kasparian treats his omissions as loud statements of guilt or incompetence. His reluctance to deal with the specifics of the Somali fraud case is a choice, and that choice will follow him for the rest of his career. As we reach the conclusion, the point is clear. Leadership is about confronting errors, not managing the image of the error. Walz's handling of this scandal is a textbook warning of what happens when PR outruns honesty. The laughter from the jokes eventually fades, leaving a lingering discomfort about the state of oversight. There is no neat ending here, only the scorched marks of a reputation that refused to face the truth. Silence and deflection are never neutral. They are the sounds of trust breaking down in real time.